So in the previous tutorial, we took a look at creating kind of the big main textures for our asset here. In this video, we're going to focus in on the lessons that we've been learning through creating these materials and really try and take them to the next level with these final materials, because these materials that we're going to be creating in this video have a little bit more personality to them through their normal map, their roughness map, and their ambient occlusion maps as well. And so the first map that I want to take a look at is the rim for our speaker there, because it's got a pretty cool ribbed material that we're going to make for it. And because it's so cylindrical, it's going to really give us a bit of a run for our money to take a look at how we're going to be able to actually texture something quite that shape. So, like always, I'm going to go to a new substance graph and I'm going to call this rim. And come back into our megaphone here. And I'm just going to drop that guy into our graph. Alrighty. So we'll go and take a look at this guy here. And first things first, like we've been doing before, we're just going to mask off a color so we could see that we've got the right area. And I'm going to come into our ID map here. And again, I know that this color for this one is this salmon color, so I'm just going to select that. And then view our outputs here in 3D. So we're going to get our black color showing up for our rim here. And so I want this to be a little bit darker color, but I don't want it to be, again, entirely black. So I'll just make it a bit of an off black there. And so now I want to go ahead and start creating the normal map for this guy. And so the normal map's going to really be where a lot of the intrigue of this particular material comes from. So we're going to give it a lot of space. And so the premise of the noise that I'm going to be using for this material is going to come from a gradient linear. So I'm going to go ahead and type gradient into our search. And so we're going to get a bunch of different gradients here. Now I want to use gradient linear too. And you can see that what we're going to get from this is on both sides, it's going to be a black value, and it's going to slowly gradient in towards a mid-white value here. And we have two parameters down here. We've got our tiling, which is going to allow us to tile this option. And we've got our rotation. Well, I know for a fact that because our rim here is actually cut up into two pieces, a seam being here and a seam being over here, you can see that we've got our rims stretched out vertically like this. So I know that if I'm to plug our linear gradient into it this way, I know that we're going to have those beams kind of coming across like this. But I want it to come and follow kind of the flow of the geometry here. So I'm going to just rotate this guy 90 degrees. And you can see now we've got them rotated. So I'm going to do a normal, not a normal blend, a normal combine. Again, making sure to add a normal to this guy here. And we can just take a look and see what it's going to do. So you can see that we're going to kind of get this ribbed value. Now the problem is it's such a big image that we're not going to quite get exactly what we want. So I'm going to come in here and maybe do something like 50. And just take a look at our rim here. And 50 might still not be enough. Let's try something like 80. And you can see maybe the effect that I'm trying to go for here is just giving it a little bit more visual intrigue. And I think maybe 80 might even be too low. Let's try 100. Yeah, and I think 100's kind of close to what I want it to do. You know, trying to ignore obviously all of this stuff in the background, just looking at our rim here. Yeah, I think 100 is what we're going to want to go with. So I'm going to do what we always done and mask this off. And that's looking awesome, really, right? That's a great start. But if you come over to the seam lines here, like I said before, you can see that they don't actually line up. And that's because of where our UVs are on our UV map, right? In comparison to our noise. So what we're going to have to do is create kind of a second copy of this, translate it a little bit or transform it to line up, and then reblend it back into our input for our normal here. And so that's the route we're going to take with this. So again, I'm going to move this back a little bit. And so I'm going to start by creating the mask that we're going to use for this, because this might be a little bit difficult to visualize, but I think this will be the best area for us to start so that we can see the natural progression of what we're trying to accomplish here. So I'm going to create a shape node. And with this shape node, I am going to crush it down on the X here. Maybe not quite as much as that. And bring it down on the Y. I'm also going to bring this guy back. And I'm going to add a blend node. And I'm going to plug our mask into the bottom here. So what we're trying to do is I'm trying to just isolate one of these particular UVs. And the reason I'm trying to isolate only one is because when I isolate one, I can then use this as a mask for when we take this guy here, create a transform of it that's a little bit offset, and then blend it back in and use it as the mask there so that we can blend them back together by only transforming one of these UV islands. So I'm going to plug this shape into here. Maybe bring this back a little bit because I'm going to need a transform 2D node. So now when we take a look at this, I'm going to use this as a subtract. So you can see now I've taken this and taken this guy and subtracted it from the calculation here. And actually, I might not even need the transform 2D there. And instead, I can just select this shape, bring the scale on the Y back up. And so now, essentially what I've done is created a mask for this second UV here. So what I'm going to do with this now is drag this guy out and add a transform 2D node. And I'm going to come and blend these back together with each other. Okay? But you can see that the problem right now is that if I start to move and shift this using both our UV islands there, they're going to just shift together and they're never really going to line up because they're always shifting equally apart from each other. So instead, what I'm going to do is use this to mask off a certain area of it. So now when I move it, you can see that I'm only moving one part, and now I can actually line these up. So this is just going to take a little bit of finessing. And something like that should be okay. Again, a very, very fine detail. And if you really, really zoom in, yes, you're going to be able to see a seam, but we're never going to be that close. And so now this is going to allow us to line up this pattern across our UV seams here. And you can see what it's done. Maybe if our normal map here, you can see that we've kind of just offset them a little bit to line up on our 3D view here. And the same thing down here for our seam. If I can even find it, is this it right here? Yes. And so you can see we're going to see a little bit of a seam, but realistically, you're never going to see that seam in game. And now the last part that I want to conduct for this material here is just taking a look at its roughness. And again, because it's a darker color, it might be a little bit more difficult to see its roughness in the long run. And because it's a very busy normal map here, again, it's going to be a little bit difficult to see its overall roughness. So we're not going to pay too much mind to the detail that we're adding to it. But I would like to use our curvature to kind of give us an overall indication of what the normals are doing to the roughness of this material. So I'm going to drag this guy back. And I'm going to use a curvature smooth again. And just bring that guy in here. And by adding a blend, I'm going to use a levels again to invert this guy so that our, glossy areas aren't directly in the crevices, but rather on the top or the tips of this mesh. So doing something like this. And just playing with our outputs a little bit, right? Making the insides a little bit rougher, but still adding some gloss to it there. And then I'm going to make sure that I mask this off using our mask. And so now we have full control over how rough or glossy our rubber is. And again, I want to keep this a little bit rougher, but nothing too crazy. And again, maybe I'll just bring this back up. And we'll be able to play around again with the roughness of this material once we start adding some more grime and grunge to the overall material or the overall asset. And so now the next component we're going to take a look at is our walkie-talkie here. And this one's going to be pretty fun because it's a little bit of everything we've done so far, being the text, adding some unique normals, some noise and roughness. And we're also going to figure out a way to kind of replicate or simulate the idea that there's kind of an internal cavity within this area here that you'll be able to actually speak into. And we're also going to take a look at kind of replicating as if there was a bit of an internal component to this walkie-talkie. So you'll see what I mean in a minute here. So I've gone ahead and I've made that walkie graph using the same setup that we've been using before. And I'm just going to drag and drop this guy in. And so now I'm going to jump into this graph here. And I'm going to go ahead and set up its base color. And this time we're going to kind of go through the process of setting up its entire base color. And then we'll go about adding a little bit more information through the normals and the roughness and the ambient occlusion as well. So I'm going to make sure that we first select our walkie, and I know it's this nice purple one up in the top corner here, top right corner. And I'll bring this out and over. And I'll just add a blend. And bringing our mask in over here, we can drag and drop our uniform node. And I'm going to make this again a bit of an off black, brand black. And I'm just going to view outputs in 3D. And this is going to give us our walkie, and that might be a little bit too dark still. And something like that maybe. So we're pretty much going to use this color as the basis for our walkie, and I'm going to just drag and drop a new environment into our scene here just to get a bit of a different lighting setup. However, we're going to add a little bit of variation in the color also through its geometry. So with our normal map here, if I just drag this guy out, give us some space, I'm going to want to use, again, a curvature. And we're going to do a curvature smooth. I'm going to bring this guy back here. And I'm going to add a levels on top of this curvature smooth. And I'm going to add a blend. And so what we're going to do with another uniform color is I'm just going to make this brighter. And I'm going to set the blending method to overlay. I'll just make it a little bit brighter. And so I'm going to plug in our levels as the mask for this guy here. If we come up and take a look, and we really crunch in our levels here, you can see what we're going to get is kind of some information along the cavities here, where we'd maybe get a little bit of wear and tear, and it might be a little bit difficult to see. Let's see if I change this blending mode here to something like, yeah, there we go. So we're going to be getting some information kind of like this, some edge wear or edge detail. And let's see if there's any better blending mode for this. Maybe a soft light. Yeah, soft light's pretty good. And we can play around with this white value, maybe make it a little bit brighter so that it just kind of stands out just a little bit more. Again, just having some of that wear and tear of the information there. And I want to make sure that I just get rid of any of the excess information here, right? Some bleed over into other materials. So I'm going to just blend this together and use our mask to multiply so that it's only going to accept this part of our levels node here. And then we can play around with our levels pretty freely if we wanted to, right? Crunching it up a little bit more. Maybe bringing that back down a little bit. Yeah, something like that looks pretty good. I'm also going to go ahead and I'm going to use that information that we've just made right here to blend in on top of our roughness, right? Because it's got some good edge information that we know is going to be a little bit rougher wear and tear, right, on our material. So I just want to go ahead and add that first before we get moving anywhere else and we forget about it. So if I add a blend, and I just take this guy here, so I'm going to select the screen option, and then I'm just going to bring the opacity down to maybe 0.5. So again, we're getting just all of that wear and tear, again, on the corners of the edges, and maybe that's even a little too much. Something like 0.35 maybe. Yeah, so that we're just getting, again, a little bit of uniqueness around oh man, I can't think of words today, the edges. Yeah, and that's starting to look pretty cool. And finally, the last thing that I want to do for our base color right now is I want to go ahead and add a little icon or a little indicator for volume right on our little slider here. And so how I'm going to go about doing that is I'm going to be using our primitive shapes here. And I'm going to blend it with a transform of itself. And so if we take a look and just drag this guy out for more space. I'm going to drag this out and add a transformation 2D. And so I'm going to decrease the scale a little bit on that and decrease the Y value as well. And so right now I'm going to be getting just the cube showing up, or now the rectangle in this case. But if I subtract and I rotate this guy a little bit, you can see that we're going to be able to develop a unique piece of geometry here. And so what I'm going to do is just scale this guy out this way. And I'm just going to rotate it and lift it up so that we get a volume kind of something like that, right? And I might just bring the X down a little bit just to decrease the overall size of that, and just rotate it again to get that sharp edge down at the bottom there. And so now with this new piece of geometry that we've made, I'm going to add another transform node onto this guy here. And I'm going to just blend this in. Instead of using it as a mask, I'm just going to use the white color value itself. And so when I plug that in, we're going to get a red connection, because remember, we're going to need to do a color value when blending with another color value. So to do that, I'm going to just type gradient map, and that's going to allow us to plug in a grayscale value and create a color value for it. Now, the problem is it's created our entire thing as black, and to get rid of all the black value but keep the white value, right, of our blend here, well, we already know how to do that. We've been doing that this entire time, you know. So we're going to go ahead and do the same exact thing. We're going to go to our blending mode. We're going to change our blending mode from copy, and we're going to go all the way down to screen. And you can see now we've gotten rid of the black background and only kept that white value there. So now with this selected, I'm going to go ahead and I want to move this guy to the appropriate position. And I know that, again, the appropriate position is up in this right corner here. However, if you need to find an area on your mesh, remember that we can just go up to our resources here, drag in our UV texture, and then blend these two together to get a better idea of where we are actually moving these nodes around our geometry. So another issue that we can see immediately is with our transformation 2D, we're getting a bunch of tiling, and we don't want to do that tiling, right? So if we come down to our tiling mode and go to absolute, we can just hit no tiling, and then we'll just have a single piece of information that we can move around. So I'm going to come way down here, and again, this is going to be really, really tiny because it's a very small piece on our UV map. And here we're going to have our information showing up. So I'm going to just plug this guy real snug, make him a lot smaller. I want him to be about as small as the button here, or the dial. And I'm going to do something kind of like that. Right? So that we kind of get our volume going up. And we can even do something kind of cool with it too, right? Now that we've got it in place and we've got it set up, the nice thing about procedurality is that I can go ahead and if I want to maybe make this, instead of a solid piece, I can actually split it up into some singular bars there. What we can do is go to blend. I'm going to take a shape node here. Just decrease this guy down on the X. Go ahead and subtract this, right? So we're going to start using this to subtract from our value and maybe bring that down on the X even more. I'm just going to use a tile generator to input our image here. And now that might be a little too small to show up on our thing here. But if I go ahead in our tile generator increase the amount on the X, and increase the X size. You can see now that I'm just procedurally changing our little dial here. And then we can come into our transform again, right? And we can still reposition this, and it's not destructive in any manner. We can go ahead and edit this as we see fit. And we don't have to worry about completely destroying all the data that we had created. And so that's pretty cool. That's really a nice thing about the Substance Suite, but particularly Substance Designer when we texture in this software, because we can go ahead and start creating these materials themselves. And as long as we've situated ourselves up procedurally, we can go ahead and pretty much do whatever we want without having to worry about completely messing up our material. We can also come back here and change the amount of bars as well to something like that, a little bit easier to see, right? And so that's looking pretty cool. And so I'm pretty happy now with our base color here. We might be able to go into our little bar there, maybe bring the opacity down to maybe something like 0.8. Again, just to give it a little bit more grunge or grime to it, right? Faded opacity a little bit. But now I want to go ahead and I want to start playing around with our normal map, right? Because I want to give this a little bit more surface information than just this kind of smooth but dirty surface here. So I'm going to bring that back and bring out our normal here. Drag this guy down. And the first thing I want to do is I want to create the overall kind of bumpiness of the surface here, right? Give it a little bit of textile to it, or texture. So I'm going to go ahead and add a fractal sum 2. And this is just a bunch of different noise, right? It's darker, but it's relatively noisy here. And I'm just going to create a normal node from this. I'm going to add a normal combine here. And I'm just going to plug this guy in. And right now, this is really, really incredibly noisy and way noisier than I want. So I'm going to come to our normal here. And I'm going to bring the opacity, or the intensity, I should say, down to something like 0.025. And so this is going to give it just a little bit of surface information, right? A little bit of noise, but it's going to add a whole lot of personality to it, right? You can see even here, if we just go from this guy to this guy, it really adds quite a lot to it, I think. I also want to go ahead and start adding some text to our walkie here to give it a little bit more personality again, right? So I'm going to create a text node. Again, I'm going to make sure that we're set on the impact. And I'm going to call this walkie, right? This is going to be our first text here. And if I just create a normal for this guy here, I want to make sure that we actually have this pressed into the walkie-talkie versus being pushed out. So again, I'm going to set this to a negative value, -1. And I'm going to do another normal combine here. So when I bring this in and we take a look here, you can see, where can we see it? Here we are. So we can see a little bit of our W right up here, but that's obviously not where I'm going to want it. So if we take a look and we click on our walkie, this might be a little bit difficult to see, right? Well, the nice thing is, if I actually take this and plug this into our curvature, we're going to have a little bit of an easier time seeing where this is now. So I'm going to just click this guy here and bring this guy way over here, because I know that the front face of my walkie is over in this area here. And it is right down here. So I'm going to bring this guy right down and do something like that, right? So now we can bring this kind of over. And we're going to get that nice imprint there. Now I think that maybe -1 is a little bit too much. So I'm just going to do -0.5 there. That might even be a little too much. Let's try -0.25. And something like that, right? I might also just decrease this size again here. Bring this guy over. Try and get him right in the middle. There we go. So now we've got a little bit of normal information from our text here. And we can go ahead and we can just compile a whole bunch of text nodes in this area and then share a normal map so that we don't have to keep, share a normal node so that we don't have to keep creating a bunch of different normal nodes for each text, as long as we're happy with them all sharing the same normal intensity. So what I'm going to do is drag this out for more space, because you can never get enough space. Bring this over here. And I'm just going to duplicate this guy. And I'm going to blend these two together. And we're going to do the screen mode here. And plug that guy in. So now again, if we take a look at our curvature here, I'm going to bring this guy. And I want this guy to be over here where we've got this little switch here to be able to speak, right? So now I'm going to just rotate this and I'm going to find where it is. So it's up here. Oh, wrong view. So now if I bring this guy up, right? So now that I've got it positioned, I'm going to be able to come in here and instead of walkie, I'm going to type speak. And we can probably bring this guy's size down just a little bit. And bring this down. And again, I'm finding maybe that normal map is still a little bit too strong again. So I can come to my intensity and do -0.1. Yeah, and that's starting to look a little bit better. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'll come over here and I'll add a volume text as well to allow me to just, again, add a little bit of variety to this texture here. So I'll do another blend node on top of this guy and do screen. And I'll just control and duplicate him. Bring this guy up here. Again, bringing this up and along our mesh. Remember that we placed our volume over here on this side. So we're going to need to just rotate this guy around, make sure he's on the opposing side as well. And I'm going to title this volume. All right. And so now we've got a pretty cool looking walkie-talkie, right? And we've got some signage as well to help us just visualize our asset. Give it a little bit of personality here. That's looking pretty sweet. Now the final thing that we want to do with this asset is we want to go ahead and create kind of the mouthpiece here where it looks like we have kind of an internal workings with our walkie. So how we're going to do that is I'm going to just push this forward and put this over here. And I'm going to go ahead and create a shape node. And so with this shape node, I'm going to set it to be a disk because I want the talking piece to have a bit of a curve to it, right? Not just so it's a box, because a box would be too easy, right? We want to give it a little bit more personality. So I'm going to add a transform node and a normal node on top of those because I want to be able to move it around and then contribute some normals to our walkie here. So forcing it there, we're not going to be able to see very much of anything here, but you can see we've got a little bit of a normal here. And I'm actually going to, again, do a -1 because we want to indent it into our geometry. So when I do a normal combine and bring this back, I'm going to be able to plug this in. And you can see that we have some of it showing up right here. And so, again, this is going to be a little bit of a tricky understanding as to what we're doing here. But I'm going to do my best to take it slow. And we're going to show kind of each step along the way. So I'm going to bring my normal back, bring my ID up there and bring my normal back so that there's a lot of room. And just bring these guys over here. So now I want to bring my normal output and plug this into the curvature so that I'm going to be able to see a little bit of the curvature here to help us kind of navigate this transform. So I'm going to bring this transform up, making sure that one, we're not having any tiling, and we're going to just take that down. So now I want to try and find this speaker area on my UVs here. And again, I already know where this is. It's up here in the top right corner. And I'm just going to go ahead and bring this down so it kind of fits our speaker here. Okay, and I'm just going to bring it down into the center, making sure that I want the center of this guy right in the middle there. And then right in the middle vertically there. And we might play around with that. Actually, you know what we can do is we'll just play around with the circle here. We'll play around with its scale just to bring it down a little bit. Now having situated it in the center. And so we've got the basis of kind of the circular shape that we want to do, but I want to go ahead now and we want to get rid of, well, you know, the areas where there isn't actually walkie, right? Or should I say centerpiece. We want to get rid of these beams here because these are actually part of the walkie. So what we can do is now we can come up to our circle here. And I'm going to add a blend because I'm going to subtract information from this circle, which is going to then show up on our transform circle here. And we kind of did the same exact thing when we were making this little icon over here. And it's going to be the same exact principle. So I'm going to make another shape and I'm going to leave it as a square. But I'm going to bring the square down on the X and I'm going to do about 0.65, right? So that we get something kind of like this. And with this shape here, I'm going to do a tile generator, making sure that we plug this guy in over top. And I want to make sure that we're, one, using our pattern, and two, in our blend here, we are subtracting from our circle. So now I hope you can kind of see what we're going to try and replicate here is we're going to try and get rid of the circle in all of the areas where we have our normal map bars coming down. So with that, I'm going to come to our tile generator. We don't need any on the Y. And I'm going to set the number of rectangles or tiles on our X to be about 5. And it looks like that maybe 5 isn't going to quite work. So let's try 6 and maybe about 8. That might work. So I'm going to come back to our transform here, taking a look at our information. And I'm just going to try and squeeze this guy in just a little bit to better fit our information here. And so that's going to give us a bit of a better fit, a little bit more snug, right? And so now we can also play around with the scale again to increase or decrease the overall size of this speaker. And because we've set it up where we've got our, let me take a look here again, right? We've got it set it up that no matter what size we make it, it's going to essentially subtract those bars from our primitive here. So that's pretty handy. That's really cool. And this allows us to kind of make this setup relatively easy once we know kind of the direction that we want to take with it. So now that we've pretty much completed our normals there, I want to go ahead and make sure that we're using our normals appropriately to indicate our roughness as well as our ambient occlusion, right? So I'm going to come into our ambient occlusion. And again, we don't really need to touch our metallic. And I'm going to add a blend node. And with this transform up here, I'm going to want to make sure I use this because this is the up-to-date information on where our speaker is placed. I'm going to plug this into our information there, and you can see that's going to pop up. But instead, I'm going to do subtract. And that's going to give it that shadow information to make it look like it's basically going into kind of this internal component of our material here. And this is about the only instance where I'm going to leave this on 100% shadow because I want to give that idea that there actually is an inside to this component here. And again, I might come back up and resize this guy here, maybe decrease it just a little bit. And then on our transform, just bring it up on the Y. And just play around with it there. Yep, so that's looking pretty cool. I also want to go ahead on our roughness. And I just want to indicate that we are going to be receiving no reflectivity from this guy as well. So I'm just going to hit subtract. And that's just going to pretty much guarantee that we're not getting any oh, sorry, not not subtract. Do not do subtract. We want to do screen so that it's not going to be getting any reflectivity whatsoever. So that's pretty cool. And that's going to really sell that effect for us. And so now that we've completed our walkie material, I want to go ahead and start taking a look more at our microphone here. So I'm going to go up and just create our substance graph. And then we'll come back into it. And I want to just drag that guy in. And we'll be good to go. So I'll bring them in. And first things first, we got to declare our base color here. And I'll just add a blend there, bringing this in. And so now I want to make sure to view our outputs in 3D and compute our thumbnails here. And it looks like I've forgotten to just plug that ID map in. So I'll go ahead and do that as well. And so now we need to find where on our mesh here we're going to get that walkie. And so if I just click and drag over this, kind of deep purple one here, we'll be able to see that we've got our microphone, I should say, not our walkie, our microphone selected. And I'm just going to plug in a uniform color. And just like the others, I'm going to make sure that this isn't quite black, but rather an off black. Just something a little bit brighter. All right, and so that's looking pretty good right now for our microphone, at least the color. I want to go ahead and start playing now with the normals a little bit. And so what I'm going to do is bring this guy over again and give us lots of room because this normal map is a little bit intricate. Not difficult, but certainly intricate. And I'll bring him over here. So I'm going to start by creating a fractal sum base node, creating our normal for that guy there, and then creating a normal combine, which we're going to be able to plug in. So this is going to give us the premise for our node here. And this is a little bit too noisy and not exactly what I'm looking for our normals here. I'm looking for something a little bit more with a different kind of style to it. So what I'm going to do is add a slope blur grayscale, and I'm going to just use it to distort itself. And so I'm going to increase the samples, bring the intensity way down, I'm going to change it from blur to max, and I'm going to just bring down our max level as well. And you can see I'm going to go for a little bit more of this kind of stepped look. And if we bring down our max levels here, we can see that it's just going to get larger and larger information to the point where we don't really have any quantifiable information anymore. And it's between 9 or 10 for me. Let's do 9. What if we bring up the min levels here? Yeah, maybe something around 3 is pretty cool. Just gives that subtle noise to it, right? Something a little bit unique. With this, again, we're going to be able to play around with the intensity if we want. I might want to bring it down to something like 1.5. And that's pretty much going to be the basis for our normal map. However, I want to add a little bit of information across the front of it here, such as a brand for the company or an icon or something like that. And what I'm going to do is actually maybe bring this back down to 1. We're going to go about creating some text that kind of fits around in a circular fashion here. And we're going to figure out how we can combine some nodes to do that and then situate a little, I guess, an icon for our fake company that makes these microphones. So the first thing I'm going to do is add our text because we're going to need to be able to see this to test it out. And I'm just going to call this something like my company. And we're just going to call it that for now. And we can change the font size to fit within our confines there. And the way that we're going to be able to get this text to wrap around is we're going to use a Cartesian to polar grayscale node. And you can see what that does is it takes our text here and it just swirls it around. So the way that we're going to be able to place this on our material here is we're just going to use one transform and then normal node, and we're just going to plop this in on our mesh just to see what it does first. So I'm going to do a normal combine. And again, I want to make sure that this indents my geometry, so I'm going to do -1 for now. And so now let's just take a look. Well, where are we actually going to go, right? Where is this little piece right here? Well, if we take a look down here, we can see we have a little circle right around there. So I think that's probably going to be the best place that we can take this guy. So let's just take a look here. Bring this guy way, way, way down. And you can see when I drag that on there, we're actually going to get this guy showing up. Now the problem is we've got our tiling mode on right now. So if I just turn that off, you can see that as I bring this around, this is going to be our UVs. So I'm also just going to bring in our, where is it, UV resource here, just so that I can better see the actual geometry itself. So if I add a blend mode and just plug this guy in over top, making sure our UVs is grayscale, and then just hit multiply. Oh, sorry, not multiply, we want screen. Now you're going to be able to see where this actually is. So I can center this right in the center of our geometry here, and that's going to help situate us really well. Right? So now we're right in the center. So now anything that we're going to be doing is going to be in relation to where we are situated on our UVs here. So we can call this, again, whatever we want. So I'm going to call this get learnt co. And you can see if we take a look here that we have get learnt co. And it's going to be directly over top of one another. So we need to do a little bit of editing of our text here. And you can see now if I mess around with moving it on the Y scale here, we can move it outwards or inwards here. We can also kind of rotate it if I move it on the x-axis. And if I move it, if I scale it in, should I say, you can see that we can get it to fit a little bit nicer so that the letters aren't being stretched as much. And we can do the same thing here if we're to move it up. We can get the letters to fit a little bit nicer. So I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to try and get it so that we have the get, learnt, and co kind of almost like a horseshoe here. So I'm going to do this. And just maybe move it on our x-axis here so that we're getting it kind of lining up. And actually, I should be looking, I should say, on my mesh because the unwrap is a little bit reversed. So if I do it this way here, something like that. And if I just scale this guy up kind of like this here, and see if I move it down as well, we're going to get it kind of just branching out a little bit more to the edges there. And we can also play around with our font size, right? Remember our font size in our actual thing here. So this one's going to take a lot of fine tuning, but this one is a really powerful node. It's going to allow us to get some unique information on our material here. So again, if I just bring this out towards the ledge, maybe bring this a little bit more on the X there. Just to maybe center it a little bit better. And then I'll play around with the normal, right? We'll do like -0.1, something like that. Maybe not that shallow, maybe have it a little bit better. Do negative 0.3. And there we go, something a little bit cool like that, right? So that's looking pretty sweet. So now how are we going to go about adding our logo to this, right? If we had a logo or an image that we wanted to add, well, we're pretty much going to do the same thing. And instead of trying to resituate it and add a new blend and everything, a new normal and all that, what I'm going to do is just take this option that we've created, just fix that a little bit. I just noticed it's a little off center. And what I'm going to do is add a blend node. And so what we can do now is create another shape or another icon, and it's going to allow us to blend in before we actually transform it. Right? So we'll be able to add this guy into here first, and then we'll transform it so that we're not going to have to try and line it up down in here. So what I'm going to do with this is just add a polygon 1, and I'm going to plug this in. And I'm going to make sure that I do screen. And we can just change the scale down on this guy first. And you can see essentially what we're doing, right, is just adding this right in the center there. And then it's already, because we've already set it up to work this way, actually transform it down into the area that we need it. So I'm going to do an interesting kind of node too that we might not know about is the shape mapper. And what this is going to do is take all of our shape here, all of our one shape here, and it's going to just bring it around in kind of like a pattern form. And so we can play around with it a little bit to get some interesting looking results here. And so I'm just going to play around with it, and I encourage you to play around with it as well, just to see what kind of results you can get. And so this is what I've been able to come up with my little icon here. Hopefully yours is going to be a little bit, more interesting than mine is. I might be able to just bring the scale up a little bit, play around with that. Maybe bring the width down just a little bit. And we can change the sides of it maybe. Yeah, maybe something more like that, right? Again, your icon hopefully will be a little bit cooler than mine, but this is kind of the basic principle of how we're going to be able to set that up. So when we kind of zoom out here, you can see that we're getting this nice little imprint on our material here just through our normal map. And we can change all of the normal from this directly in our normal node right here. So that's pretty cool. And so lastly, what I want to do is go ahead and just play around with the roughness of this guy. Now that we've got a very intricate normal map going on for him, as you can see down here. So I'm going to bring the roughness up. And I'm going to bring this guy out here. And I'm going to do curvature, smooth. And I want to make sure too that we also blend off the, or mask off the area, as you can see, because we're still using the normal map for our entire mesh here. So I'm going to just quickly add a blend. I'm going to take this guy and pop him in over top. And I'm going to have to come all the way back to the start where we have our input and plug that into here. And then we're going to be able to mask off everything there. And beautiful. So I'm going to come back to our roughness. Bring this over. And I'm just going to add a blend. And again, like we've done before, just plug it in over top. I'm going to add a levels node and invert this guy. And then we want to make sure to mask off this as well from our ID map. So now we're going to be able to play around with our roughness. And I'm thinking about a somewhat glossy node here. And we're going to be able to play around with that just a little bit. And I still think that's maybe a little too glossy. And something kind of just basic like that should be fine, right? Because again, we're going to add some grunge and grime up our asset here to really add a lot of variety to these bigger pieces. And just a quick little tidbit before we close out this video here. I realized that I actually didn't blend off or mask off our normals here. So you can see that we're getting those walkie normals all over our material here. So I'm just going to come in quick, blend that guy off. Make sure to do the little good old switcheroo there. And I'm going to want to make sure that we're using our mask there. And again, we're going to just be able to mask off all of the normals so that we're not swapping and sharing normals from different materials that we don't want to be placing there. So in this past couple of tutorials, we've really taken a look at hunkering down and thinking about how we can develop very realistic surfaces for our asset here. And I'll certainly agree that not all of the concepts or the components of these have maybe been the most clear on the onset of when we go about starting to create them. I certainly hope now, after we've successfully gone through how we can create these, that it makes a little bit more sense. And any areas that you might still be a little bit fuzzy on, I would encourage you to go back and give it a second watch. Now that we understand kind of the complexities that go into making these unique assets and these unique textures, we're going to go and take a look at creating our own kind of texture asset or deckle completely from scratch using only Substance Designer and some of the possibilities that we can accomplish while using this type of texture workflow.